Hello. I'm going to show you, with the aid of a few maps, why I think not only that there won't be peace in the Middle East for the next 50 years or maybe more, but that I'm not sure there'll ever be peace, at least not in the way we want to think of it. And whether I'm right or wrong, that's up to history and you to decide. So, first of all, this map behind me is a map of North Africa and the Middle East, the way we're taught to think of it. There's Morocco, Algeria, Libya, Egypt, behind me Arabia and Iran, and Turkey up there. Turkey's a little bit different, and I'll get to why I think that, but before I do, having got the political picture in our minds, let's look at the reality. This is the Middle East and North Africa as it really is. You'll notice something about this geography here, won't you? It's all the same colour, and that's the colour of sand. Now, I'm going to have to flip my picture so my head isn't in front of Iran. That's better. So, Iran doesn't show up quite as yellow as the Sahara, but it looks a bit darker. That's not because it's full of orchards and wheat fields and lettuce patches. It's because it's very mountainous. So that's rocks as well as sand. Look at this map and consider how your society would develop in such an environment. There's only one word to describe this stretch of the planet: hostile. This is a hostile environment. If you were out there on your own, you'd be as likely to survive as if someone had dumped you on a plateau on Mars without a spacesuit. During the day, the sun is vicious, there's no cloud cover, and the sand heats up literally baking hot. At night, still with no cloud cover, it's freezing cold. A strapping local peasant, acclimatised to that sort of heat, might survive 2 days out in that on his own. 3 if he was very, very unlucky. Most of us watching this video from the comfort of our centrally heated or air-conditioned homes wouldn't last the day. You see, you can't survive in that environment on your own. You have to have a tribe to protect you. The best survival strategy is, first of all, not ever to go off the beaten track too far, not to experiment, not to explore, not to get separated from the group, but to stay on the routes you know will lead you to the next waterhole, while the safety of the group will ensure that when you do get to the next waterhole, you'll have enough fighting men to beat off the other tribe that wants the same water. In Europe, if you want to get water from a river and you find it taken by another family or another clan, you walk a few yards, maybe a mile or so, and get your water a bit further downstream. You would develop a different attitude to life in those circumstances, wouldn't you? Sure, Europeans have fought each other, but various European peoples have fought and survived, even the ones who lost. That doesn't happen in desert warfare. In desert warfare, the losers die, or they get taken into slavery and absorbed. Historically, in Arabian culture, if you didn't get control of the well, that was the end for you and your entire family. So, of course, the only survivors are going to be the most efficient and probably the most brutal well grabbers. Right, things have changed a bit. because some of the cultures conquered by Islam were already sophisticated and urbanized before Islam took over. However, Islam, and by that I mean the Arabian mores that came with Islam, is a heavy influence. And although more modern water provision has disguised that ancient imperative, it's not done so 100%. And the tribalism which has it that you support your tribe, even when you know it's wrong, and the othering of outsiders, which has it that you must make them subject to you, or they'll make you subject to them, it's still firmly embedded in Muslim culture. And if you think of it like that, you'll see all the problems of the Middle East. And you'll also see why the Middle East has a long road to go before this mindset fades out a bit and a European style culture of sharing develops, if it ever does. And I'm not sure it ever will. And before anyone starts chanting Sykes-Picot, it's all the fault of the British and the French, yeah, that's an element. But if those tribes in the Middle East weren't fighting each other now within the artificial borders of Iraq and Syria, they'd be fighting each other between the tribal borders that they'd made up for themselves. Because, well, let's get back to water. Yeah, water. That's better. And that comes out of a tap. And I can be very blasé about that, can't I? My depressing prediction is that this pattern will persist because of the water situation, and that isn't going to get any better in the short term. Modern medicine has increased the population in the Middle East, while tribalism, which served the Arab culture very well in the desert, is not very efficient when it comes to municipal management. Syria's civil war, for instance, started as a result of a mass movement of peasants from the parched and underwatered farmlands into the shanties of the urban conurbations. Their farmlands didn't actually need to have run out of water, but nepotism, corruption, tribal loyalties all conspired to make efficient use of the budgets available and smooth running of engineering projects impossible. A similar mess is developing in Iran, with a UN report stating that water shortages in rural areas are acute. With few other options, many people have left, choosing uncertain futures as migrants in search of work. Now, they say this is an acute problem. An acute is a short attack of something. I want you to remember that, because it's wrong. Again, the problem is inefficiency and corruption, mainly religious corruption, by the way, in Iran. As if all that were not bad enough, when the water reduces, the desert claims back what has been taken from it very, very quickly. Sand blows over, and that's the end. You've got a real problem reclaiming that stuff. And this is where Turkey comes in. The great rivers that water the Mesopotamian plains all originate in the mountains of Anatolia. Turkey has been pursuing an aggressive policy of dam building on those rivers and lakes in the Anatolian mountains, and pretty soon Erdogan can tell Syria and Iraq to toe his line, or their rivers will dry up. And even Iran's going to be affected by that, and they're all very nervous. There have already been water riots in Iran, and we all know what happened in Syria. Meanwhile, in a not altogether unrelated incident, the kings of both Jordan and Arabia have been complaining to Israel, ironically enough, that Turkish organisations have been grabbing too much influence in Jerusalem. And they have been demanding that Israel put a stop to such Turkish influence at once. If you're wondering what on earth this has to do with the price of fish, I have to point out that everyone in the Middle East is now terrified of Turkey's territorial, not to say imperial, ambitions. because they all know that Erdogan could precipitate chaos by turning off the taps, and the resulting disorder wouldn't be confined to the immediately affected areas. We have all seen what happens when columns of discontented migrants start storming the borders, haven't we? And we all know the effect this has on countries with good services and a history of civil stability, which maintained some sort of structure even during war times, and police forces which are reasonably well disciplined. We have only the example of Syria to see what happens when such upheavals strike places where there's no stability to start with and no real rule of law, and where any sort of fragile order is breaking down anyway. It really is a worrying prospect, and I'm not sure the planners in the West are taking account of it half enough, because distance is no protection. People talk about the refugee crisis in Europe. Again, the word crisis. A crisis is a sudden attack that comes and then it goes. But it's not a crisis, to my mind. It's a chronic illness with occasional awful flare-ups. We're seeing the beginning of a period which in future history will probably end up being called the water wars. And we have to be prepared for that. Oh, by the way, before you guys in the USA sit back and relax that this is all happening thousands of miles away in the Middle East, I want you to consider that it's not the only area where idealism or fanaticism or religious or semi-religious ideas and tribal loyalties have laid the groundwork for a water problem. It's happening in California right now, isn't it?